Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Okay, we'll give it just one more minute. You know, before we get started, I always like to have an opportunity for anybody to share any good news. Any papers published, new grants, new findings, some experiment that worked out. Anybody got any good news? I do. I got an R01. Woo.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Fourth try. Persistence.
There's something to be said for that.
Fourth time's a charm.
Yeah. Oh, come on. I'm not the only person out there with any good news.
I will say, had a couple of papers move through the publication process this week and last week. One of the startup companies that I'm involved with, or the startup company that I'm involved with from Tucson, that came out of BIO5, support from the university, won a big award with Purina. We got featured in the news yesterday on K-Gun.
Yay, that's exciting. That's the dog breath one, is that
That's
it?
dog breath. Making dog breath as good as your dog.
Yes, I would say, you know, all the quality of life issues in the world, that ranks way up there.
It does hit a relatively large market.
Yeah, great. Anybody else have anything to share before we get started?
Hey, grandbaby.
Yay!
Yay.
New grandbaby. That's awesome. Everybody doing well?
We got rejected for 3 grants. I wonder how many times we're going to be swinging. I hope it's not 4.
I was going to say I, you know, got rejected for the same one 3 times. Let's not talk about the other ones.
I'm only on 2
that
for one of them.
Funding success is usually 5 to 10% for the big grants. And you know, what does that mean? I literally have, you know, that stack of rejections that's 10 to 20 times taller than anything else in my office.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we were vying for one of those U19 Center Awards for Valley Fever, and they got awarded to groups in California.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well,
Yeah.
Keep trying on that. That's so important.
The next 2 are going in June for sure.
Great.
Almost done.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm super excited today because today we have Jamie Bomer and Eric Lyons who are going to talk with you about how you talk with your program officers. And I think they have some firsthand experience on that, but I'll let them give that part. But, you know, just briefly, Jamie is the Executive Director of Biomedical, Clinical, and Health Sciences Research Development as part of the Research Development Services and RII. And Eric is the Principal Investigator of Cyverse and is also then a Professor of Plant Sciences. So I'm going to start off and ask them both if they would introduce themselves a little bit more and tell us all their experience with federal agencies. So Jamie, would you start us off?
You bet. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Dr. Barton, for inviting me. And Dr. Lyons, good to see you again. I feel like this is deja vu because I think this may be at least the second, if not third time we've done this. So I love it. So as Dr. Barton said, my name is Jamie Bomer, and I've been with the university for about 5 years now. I joined RDS, back in 2017, spent about 3 years there, and then segued to a position as the Associate Dean for Research at the brand new College of Veterinary Medicine, and then got recruited back to RDS in a role that has a really long title, but essentially means that I still support faculty in their efforts to get external funding. Prior to coming to the University of Arizona, I spent my entire career in the federal government. I started out as a researcher, a bench researcher for the Center for Veterinary Medicine within the Food and Drug Administration. I was there about 10 years. before I segued over to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And that's really when my research administration job started. I started out in the research oversight office, and I spent about 1.5 years there. And I was basically in charge of looking at the research safety and the animal welfare components of the research programs in the Veterans Health Administration. So traveled around a lot, engaged with a lot of researchers, more on a compliance level. And then I was recruited to the Office of Research Development under the Deputy Undersecretary for Health for Policy and Services. And that's when I became a program officer for the intramural program within the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I managed both the pre and post award of proposals to their internal program. So it's very similar to the NIH structure, only I served as both the scientific research officer and the program officer. And I managed infectious disease, epidemiology, clinical trials, and even in the end, I managed the mental health portfolio. So I was running anywhere from 8 to 10 study sections and managing hundreds and hundreds of grants on any given time. So that is me in a nutshell, and I will turn it over to Dr. Lyons.
Thank you so much. So I'm Eric Lyons. As Jennifer said, I'm a professor in the School of Plant Sciences here at the University of Arizona, although I originally came out to work with an early version of CyVerse called iPlant. And throughout my entire time at the university, I have been a proud member and inhabitant of the BIO5 Institute. And so just in terms of my roles with federal agencies, in 2018 through 2019, I served as a rotating program officer for the National Science Foundation in the Directorate of Biology and the Division of Integrated Organismal Systems, and for the program Plant Genome Research. In addition to that, I was able to participate in a lot of interdisciplinary programs and initiatives at NSF because I was one of the more computationally, or probably the most computationally literate person within bio. So I was able to participate in the early development of what became known as the Biological Integration Institutes, the Convergence Accelerators. I had opportunities to sit on a lot of related programs across biology, sometimes into OAC. And through that experience, it really just opened my eyes to how the federal agencies work, specifically in terms of NSF. And just one of the things that I personally had found to be really, really amazing about my job, well, actually, there were two things. The first was the seminar series. NSF had an amazing ability to get the best people and the leading researchers to come into NSF to give talks. And usually there was only 50 to 100 people that would attend because it's just internal to NSF, and those were always amazing. And the second part about the job that I really, really enjoyed, and there was many parts about it which I loved, was the opportunity to talk to new professors, people or other investigators that were crossing over to NSF, and to talk with them about what NSF does, what my program did, and help them to be successful in the future. And oftentimes that involved trying to find a good fit for their research ideas if it wasn't within my specific program.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think you've touched on some of the things that I'm going to ask you all about. And just so everybody knows, I've got a series of questions to ask that I think are kind of some general questions that are probably in all of our minds. But please feel free to interrupt at any point in time. Just raise your hand and I'll be watching for that. So great. Let's get started. So I think the first question I've heard people ask is, how do I find out which program officers I should be talking to? For instance, Eric, you mentioned that you were in in an area, in a specific division, in a specific program, and how do you even figure that part out? If either one of you have a answer to that.
I'm happy to kick it off. But the way to start out really is to take a look at the programs that are there. Use Google, search for stuff that sort of hits into the keywords, and then try to find something that's the closest fit as you possibly can. There is going to, of course, be this next phase of really trying to understand the fit of your research idea to the program, Or similarly, it's really what is that program usually funding? And so through a lot of government award searches, NSF has one, it is really easy to go take a look at a program and then see everything that has been funded by it over all time. And that usually paints a pretty good picture of it. And I'll stop at that point because the next phase often involves the engagement with the program officer, who's, oftentimes, sometimes is willing to help you try to find that good fit. But I want to make sure to turn it over to Jamie.
Yeah, I would say it really is agency dependent. And so I don't need to touch on NSF because I think you've just hit on that, looking through what's been funded for the different directorates and programs. For NIH, there's this amazing tool called Matchmaker, and you can drop in some keywords, or even if you have a specific aims page, I think it takes up to 15,000 characters, and you can use it to seek program officers that have research that matches those particular search terms that you've used, or the words in your specific aims page. And it'll give you a list. It'll pop up with a list of program officers, and you can actually click on their name and you can see their whole funded portfolio. So that gives you an opportunity. That's one way to do it. You can, of course, go through, just as Eric mentioned, you can look through the different institutes. NIH is a bit more behemoth, I would say, than NSF in terms of just there's so many different institutes, whereas I think NSF is a little bit more, a little easier to navigate in terms of the 5 big directorates. And, there's a lot underneath that. NIH is a little bit more complicated, but, those institutes have specific focus. So starting with the institute that best aligns with the research that you're doing, you can go about it that way. But I'm a big fan of the Matchmaker tool. I think it's easy, it's straightforward, and it gives you some options too, which I think is something we're gonna also touch on as we get into more, like the contacting program officers. Other agencies are different. Another way is look at the solicitation. If you are responding to a specific solicitation, there's often scientific contacts that are listed. Some of those are very broad. So for DoD, it may just be like a general email box, but that is a first line connection. With VA, with their internal program, it's designed a little bit differently. You have to have eligibility to apply to VA, but the contacts are all listed in the 4 different divisions within VA.
Jamie, the point of clarification on DoD, I thought I'd heard that basically once the solicitation is out, they won't talk to you anymore. Is that correct?
That's why I say they usually have like a general, it's sort of a triage email I've seen on their BAAs. I've heard some people do get some responses, but they're mostly like logistical questions. And DoD is a really unique agency. And, I engaged a lot when I was at the VA with DoD program officers. So I know a little bit about that black box, but I don't know as much as other people. I know one thing is once you're funded and you have a great relationship with your program officer, it is sometimes a little bit harder though to establish those relationships prior to submitting your proposal. Okay. So sorry to be broad about that, but I don't want to overspeak and say, having not been a DoD program officer.
Yep. Okay, so I think if we have anybody who's particularly interested in DoD, we do have some researchers here on campus who have been well funded by them, and we can get you in touch with them, and they may have some tips and tricks and things to do there. I think RDS in the past, at least, has also had some, special programs on dealing with the DoD, and I think there's a DEP score coming up.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So if you're not on the RII and RDS mailing list, make sure that you are and can keep in touch with those. Great. Okay. So now the big question, will these program officers talk to me? What's the best way to approach them? What if they don't respond?
I'm happy to start out on this one. So first thing you want to keep in mind, of course, when reaching out to program directors is they're all people. And a lot of them have typical academic training. And all of you can just take a look at your colleagues here at the university or your collaborators externally and realize that there's a very wide range of personalities and ways that people like to engage with one another. So with that, some people really like to engage, some people you can never get an answer from. But the way that I would recommend contacting program officers at NSF really comes down to one of two strategies. Number one, you're new to the program for a variety of ways, and you just want to learn a little bit more about it. You can try to email them and say, hey, I'm a new investigator and I'm looking at your program. Would you have a couple of minutes just to talk to me, to tell me about your program? This may or may not work. Oftentimes a better approach is to write up a 1 or 2 page summary, a white paper of your research idea. Some officers or multiple program officers in that program and say, hey, I'm wondering if this is a good fit for your program. Could I schedule a time to chat with you, maybe 30 minutes or something like that. Some program officers will engage with a conversation. Some prefer email. You may want to give them the opportunity to do both there. And that's usually a good way to sort of kick it off. And then they really like to have in front of them your research idea, as opposed to having a cold call where you're just pitching something to them. As with a lot of scientists, they enjoy the opportunity to read, to think, to digest, to look at stuff. And importantly, if they've got something in front of them, they can always be, prior to your conversation, looking and checking with other programs to see if it might be a better fit for them, so that when they talk to you, they can say, hey, yeah, I took a look at this. It's interesting. It's outside of what our program does, but I did go to talk to this other program or this person in that other program where it might be a better fit. You may want to reach out to them. In the meanwhile, let me tell you something interesting about my program and hope that in the future you might be able to come up with a proposal that fits better.
Yeah, I agree with everything Eric just said. And I think it's pretty universal that no program officer wants a cold call, because they want to be prepared, just like you want to be prepared when you talk to them, and to make sure that you're asking questions that will help shape your proposal and to be more competitive. So in terms of will they talk to me? I mean, that is the job of a program officer, but I do agree that every program officer is different. They have the saying in NIH that if you know one institute, you know one institute. Well, it kind of goes the same for program officers. I think it also depends too upon what time of the year it is and where they are in review cycles and how engaged they are with the study sections that review proposals that go to their portfolio. And I hear program officers say all the time, if you don't hear from me, wait 2 weeks, hit me up again, send me a repeat email, because you never know. They could be on vacation. They could be in the middle of council reviews. It just depends upon what they have going on. As Eric mentioned, they're busy people. It's not just about the proposals that they get and talking with faculty. I think that's the thing that we all enjoy the most, is being able to talk about the research and help people find a good fit and a good home for their research. But it's not always a reality that we have time for that. I never turned a PI away from speaking with them. So I can speak for myself that, again, like Eric mentioned, that's one of the things of the job that I loved the most, was getting those emails, getting those one-pagers, being able to think about the ideas that the researcher was proposing. It also gave me an opportunity to dig into my portfolio and see what was already funded and how it aligns with things that were already in the portfolio. If it was something, a topic area that was really saturated, and I knew that it wasn't going to do well at study section because there were so many that were already funded in that area, I might be able to advise how they could tweak it, how they could, change direction. And sometimes that's not always the case. And you have to kind of advise them to go outside. It was often that I recommended that some of our faculty seek NIH funding as well, to kind of hedge their bets, especially if it was a very saturated topic. So the other trick that I often tell people too about non-responsive program officers is look for another program officer in that institute that's very similar in focus and reach out to them. So sometimes we always are a little bit ashamed when one of our colleagues comes to us and says, hey, this faculty member reached out to me and says they've been trying to get in touch with you. And sometimes just that little bit of shaming can, prompt you to reorganize your schedule to get back to someone if you really have been intending to do it, but other things have been getting in the way. So my message is don't give up, try to find some other avenues, give them 2 weeks. And if you have to, go to a colleague and, reach out to them and see if they may be able to talk with you as well.
I just want to second everything that Jamie just said about that. Wait 2 weeks and follow up. And just one of the other things too, especially when you're working on that one pager, you want to ensure that that one pager is as easy for a person who is very knowledgeable about your field, but a non-expert in whatever you're proposing to follow. And there was this formula that I would often use for my internal reports, especially when trying to summarize an entire proposal or an annual report for other people within NSF as it sort of moves through the approval process. That is a really good format, especially for people trying to convey an idea. And I say there's 3 sentences you want to write down at the top, which is the overall goal of this project is to do X. This is important because why? I am going to accomplish this by doing the following things, and then sort of briefly list out your specific aims. Very, very easy way for someone to sort of understand the whole process of what it is you're doing and really why people want to know about it. You could be really interested in some neat little tiny molecular mechanism if it's in biology. And most people may not be familiar with the genetics to that level. And so it's up to you to really paint that broader picture as to what the impacts could be if this was understood better.
Great advice. Great advice. Yeah, I think it comes down to communication, right? We keep hearing that over and over and over again. So thank you. Yeah, and I can just second that. I sit on the National Advisory Council for the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, so I get to hear a little bit and engage with the program officers there at NIBIB. And I was thinking of putting in a training grant, a T32. NIBIB is a fairly small institute, and they're very, very interested in making sure that they cover the breadth. They've got a fairly broad breadth with this fairly small institute. And so they actually have a published 2-page format that they want you to fill out before you even talk with them. And I'm sure one of the very first things they're going to do is to say, well, if we already have 3 T32s that deal with magnetic resonance imaging, we're not going to fund a 4th. I'm quite sure that's part of it. So yeah, not everybody has that same formula that they want you to fill out, but I think that same information is good. Awesome. Well, you've been discussing this all along. What information can they provide? You might also want to touch on what should you not ask your program officer? Is there information they can't provide?
You want me to start, Eric, or you want to go?
You take this one. I have a feeling.
I feel like I'm punting everything to you. So let me start with one of the things that they can't tell you, and it's you have to fight the urge to ask. And this is especially, I'm going to say, after your proposal has been reviewed, you've gotten a summary statement, you've got a score. Let's all hope we've been discussed. The first urge is to ask the program officer, am I going to get funded? Okay, and that is not something, there's a process, right? And you want to build that relationship with your program officer. So if there is an opportunity for them to advocate for you, if you're on the line, if you're on the cusp, if there's a way, they can get more information from you, they're going to ask you for that information so they can help advocate for you. But coming right out and asking about pay lines, am I going to get funded? Things like that is probably not the best way to start the conversation. So I'll kick that off with a don't, and Eric, and I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. You know, at the end of the day, the decisions around funding are multifaceted, and there's a lot of variation from you know, program to program within an organization, within one of these federal agencies, and similarly across federal agencies. And so everyone has a process. Just keep it all in mind that, you know, there's a lot of factors that are going to go into a funding decision, and not all of it will be made privy to you. And that's just the way these systems operate for fairness. Whenever you talk to a program officer, you're gonna, you know, hear their speak. And as you get to know a program officer, as you get to know an agency, you're going to start to learn the lingo, and you're going to start to be able to do a better degree of interpretation. They're going to be saying things that are very specific and very much in line with what they can tell you. Listen carefully, and if you are confused on a point, you can ask clarifying questions. But if they're doing a dodge, and you'll know it, just let it go. One of the most important things to do, especially early on when you're starting to generate your giant pile of rejections, and especially if it's a second or third rejection where you really have gone in there and you've addressed all those reviewer comments, and dang it, this time it really should have gotten funding, but it didn't. You'd still want to talk to your program officer and get as much feedback as you can, and to do so in a way that is cool, calm, collective, and very important, appreciative of the information and knowledge that they're going to try to impart on you. Whether or not you listen to it, whether or not you hear it, whether or not it makes sense to you, are all open questions. But be appreciative of their time. Nothing sucks more than kicking off one of those meetings where the person has contacted you, you know, just flip your you know, put yourself in their shoes. And the easiest one for us often are with upset students that have gotten a B as opposed to an A, or a C as opposed to a B. And they're like, I really deserved it. Why didn't I get that 1 point, right? And instead, they're not sort of listening to the things that you're trying to tell them in terms of what it takes to be successful in the future. I'm trying to think about some other key things. They'll never tell you if you're funded. They will never tell you straight up if your idea sucks, but they're going to give you hints that it probably won't be competitive in the program. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're welcome to submit anything to NSF. As long as it passes, you know, the preliminary compliance, it can go to panel. People will review it, but you really don't want to waste your time or their time. And so, you know, program managers will have key phrases where they're like, yeah, you know, these are the kind of things that really get funded. Here is something that would really strengthen your proposal in the future, et cetera, et cetera. And my best advice, if you really want to understand the review process and what happens behind the scenes, and then how that gets translated into words that are either written down in a panel review or a panel summary, is go serve on these panels. Another great way to contact a program officer, again, depending on the agencies, and this can work in NSF, is contact your program officer and say, hey, I'm a new PI. I'm going to be interested in applying for your program. I don't think I have anything necessarily really ready at this point, but I would love to serve as a reviewer. They will do a series of screenings, which is you're going to get hopefully a chance to do some ad hoc reviews, which means you'll get sent 1 or 2 proposals, you review them, you write them in, and you send it back. And if those are of sufficient quality, you can always also contact your program officer if it's the first time you've done it because you're new and you're starting out, and say, hey, can I just discuss my review with you just to make sure, or could you just read this, give me some pointers before I do the full submit? You know, it's a good way to show your engagement and investment within that program. And then eventually you'll get the opportunity to be invited to a panel. And we can talk more about what serving on a panel is like, but I cannot tell you that of any exercise that will make you a better and more successful proposal writer than serving on panels. It doesn't necessarily mean your funding rate's going to go up, but chances are you're going to be much more productive with your time. in terms of those applications that you fill out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And NIH has similar programs where you can serve as a reviewer, and it typically starts out as an ad hoc. Even VA, I often relied very heavily on ad hoc reviewers. And, we try to have a good mix of reviewers that are at the full associate and assistant professor. So there's always those opportunities, and I couldn't agree more that helps you in terms of understanding that process, really helps you craft your own proposals. Just to reiterate one thing that you said, Eric, and about the being an emotional response. This is why we always tell people wait 2 weeks after you get your summary statement before you contact a program officer, so that you're not so upset. And the other don't that I would say, that information that a program officer can't tell you, is they're not going to tell you who on the panel reviewed your proposal. NIH releases those rosters with your summary statement. Don't waste your time trying to speculate on who of these 25 to 30 people reviewed me and screwed me over in comments. Don't waste your time there. Just try to just digest it. And even on the occasion that there are absurd comments that are made, just let it go and try to highlight the things that that you might be able to change about your proposal that really make a lot of logistical sense, and talk to your program officer about those things that that you can fix, and get their feedback on that. So I completely agree. Just try to go into it with an open mind, and don't be emotional and react to what a reviewer has said. That they're just a reviewer, and it doesn't mean that your idea is terrible. It doesn't mean that it can't be fixed. It's just best to talk to the program officer, because they're the ones that are going to be able to give you the best advice as to how to make it better.
And I'm just going to add in 2 more things, which is, if you do come back with the rejection, wait a couple of weeks, schedule time with the program director, and then definitely find people that have been on panels, or someone like Jamie, someone like me, to go through those panel summaries with you. That's a great chance for you to be angry, and that's a great chance for us to leverage our internal Fed speak and tell you what we think is being conveyed within those messages. And it just sort of helps settle things down. The other thing too, whenever you approach your program manager after, sorry, that's a third thing. My second thing is that you sometimes will get inappropriate comments in a review. And this can happen at NSF particularly high. And the reason for that is you're going to get a bunch of individual reviews. And that's just, you, me, whoever, sitting down, reviewing your proposal. Could be at a great time, could be at a happy time. It could be at the last minute, frantically on the plane flight. And we all get short, and we say things sometimes that could have been phrased a little more diplomatic. Just realize that when there are inappropriate comments in those reviews, those often are getting marked and commented on inside of the internal tracking system. At NSF, it's called eJacket, your jacket for your proposal. And there are comments that said, hey, here was something that was inappropriate. Here was a review that just ignore this one. We can't accept it. And your program director, program manager may tell you about that, but don't look at that and get upset. Just realize that behind the scenes, as program managers are screening for that and making sure that they're not negatively impacting the review of your proposal, especially if it's on the edge. The final thing is when it comes to these reviews, and especially at NSF, and the same with NIH, you'll get a bunch of individual reviews, and then you get a panel summary in many cases. That panel summary is a synopsis of what was discussed. And so if a reviewer was really far off, and the other reviewers catch it, talk through it, have that opportunity to really think through what that means, it's going to be reflected in that panel summary. Give more weight to what's said in the panel summary than what those individuals are saying. But if some individual is like bringing up a point that really rubs them the wrong way, if you can smooth that out so you don't accidentally upset a reviewer in the future, probably a good thing. But again, as much as you can, take it with the same kind of insult as somebody beeping on you because you were daydreaming at the stoplight. Keep moving on.
That's awesome advice. And I think you've already addressed a lot of my next question, which is, what should I do if I feel a program officer is being unfair or is uninterested? And I think a lot of it is maybe the thinking very carefully about what's going on. They may not be being unfair or uninterested. It may be something that you need to learn how to, one, how to engage them respectfully, and to understand how to read between the lines. And I think this is one of the things that RDS advertises that they do, right, is help with resubmissions and understanding those summaries. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes.
So that,
yes. And Eric even mentioned, like reaching out to one of us to just get some help sort of distilling what that information means. We've seen more of these panel summaries and summary statements, and then we probably want to admit. And we definitely know the lingo because we've spoken it and we've written it and we've given it. So yeah, it definitely, I do hear from people often, like my program officer is unresponsive. They aren't advocating for me. And, in really, really extreme situations, if it's a case where you haven't been funded yet and you're not in this PO's portfolio and, you feel like you're being as responsive as you can to their comments, it could be that you're just not a good fit for their portfolio. And maybe the conversation needs to be, how can you help me find a good fit for my research? It may be that they're just not the PO for you. And so I think that goes a lot, Jennifer, to your point of read between the lines. They may just be saying to you as diplomatically as they possibly can, you have a great idea, but it's just either saturated in my portfolio or it's been done and unsuccessful, or this just is not something that is of interest to me in particular. So find someone who can be a good champion. And it may mean tweaking some things, but think about how you could reshape that conversation with the program officer to really be able to develop a proposal that's going to be competitive, even if it's not to something that is going to fall into their specific portfolio.
And sorry, you're bringing up a really good point here. When it comes to something that's not a good fit or it's not exciting, just go back to that one pager and really think about that sentence. This is important because if you're just interested in the technology, if you're interested in the approach, or you just like some system because you really like it and you're unable to sort of tie it into some larger framework, chances are it's going to be very difficult to get that funded. And the reason really comes down to the fact that it's not because it's not neat, it's not because it's not interesting, and it's not because you're not brilliant. It's because there are literally 10 more ideas being pitched out there through this process that are able to capture people's attention and imagination in a different kind of way. And as much as you can, you're going to want to bring people along for that kind of ride.
That's
oh,
awesome.
one other thing. This is something that I saw when I was at NSF, and this was pre-COVID. We get delegations from universities. So it would be like, Jennifer Barton is going to take a whole bunch of BIO5 researchers and plan this big trip to go out to NSF and meet all these program directors, in person. All I can say is there was nothing more annoying than that. And it was something that was pretty widely appreciated, as this is just a pain. If you want information about a program or a division or information about one of these agencies, we can request NSF to send somebody out here on a diplomatic kind of mission. And in the past, they would be more than happy to come out, especially if you already have a program officer that you know well, or you have a colleague that does. You can say, hey, can you come out and just talk about NSF and your program? We've got this group of new investigators, et cetera, et cetera. And that tends to work a lot better. You can still do that today. It's just going to be virtual until all the travel restrictions are lifted.
That's good to know. All right. Little do we know. See, all those people who were being nice to me when I went out there, and really they were thinking, oh, what a pain in the neck, this big delegation coming through.
Sorry. Yes.
I didn't come with a big group of people, no, but yeah, that's interesting because you'd oftentimes hear about that as being something that universities would do. Yeah, let's take all our promising young investigators and take them out. I think it was really good for the promising young investigators, but
yeah,
maybe not so good for the program officers.
Jamie, I don't know if this came through your place.
Yeah, no, ooh, not very often, let me just say, because we were an intramural program, so we had a bit more control over that. And we tended to do outreach. So we would have certain weeks out of the year where program officers would pick certain sites where they had a lot of funding, or the reverse of that, did not have a lot of funded investigators, and would go, and essentially the equivalent of the associate dean for research at the specific VHA would pick a handful of researchers to present to us. And we found that to be so much more useful. And so we just scheduled those times, and places could petition for us to come at any point. And you know, we were always willing to do that as long as travel allowed it. I do think there is a time and a place, Jennifer, to your point about going and visiting NIH, there is a time and a place for a particular faculty member around a specific initiative or for profile raising. There is the right way to do that, but I think it goes to making sure everyone's prepared for that visit. Not like, I'm going to spend my whole day talking about the same thing over and over and over again. There's a time and a place for a particular faculty member to profile raise with an agency. And it's usually at the interest of the agency because they're interested in a particular idea and knowing and understanding what that university or what that faculty member can do for them. The large groups of people, I agree with you, Eric. I'm not sure what the value add. For early career faculty in particular, I know I have attended NSF regional seminars. I've attended the NIH regional seminars. Probably the most beneficial thing about both of those is the fact that the program officers are there. At NSF, I found them to be incredibly approachable. You can walk up to them after they give a talk. You can ask, hey, do you have a half an hour over the course of this workshop to talk to me? I've never heard one of them say no. They always make time. They have networking events that you can talk to them. At the NIH regional seminars, they literally have, you can sign up for slots and they have really broad representation. That's probably a more efficient way if you if you want that face-to-face time than just showing up in DC and expecting to get some meaningful thing out of that. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Great to hear. Thank you. I think at this point, I'd like to open it up. Questions, comments, maybe you all have experiences you want to share with the group too. If any of you all have sat on a study section or engaged with program officers. So what questions do you have?
Oh, may I?
Oh,
Yes, Adam.
sure. Yeah, Joseph and then Adam.
Okay, I have certain experience with NIH, with agencies. There was a rejection because, as you said, you know, the award is very, very rare event. It's usually you have to send 10 grants to get one. And my experience is different. So you never ever get rejected because of your idea is your purpose of project is wrong. It's not important because of. I was always rejected because of approach, because it's pretty easy to reject. Never happened that my institution is bad and I have a bad reputation or whatever. You are rejected because of approach, and it's a black box, and you know you don't know who's your reviewer, and black box behavior, it leads to speculation. You always speculate why it didn't happen. You are never told the right reason why. If I would get like a panel summary is much more important than individual reviewers, true? But if you don't get through individual reviewers, you will never get a panel summary because simply they trash it. They and panel summary is not transparent. You'll never see or hear or get something which is going from summary, from real summary. It happens to me. I get good reviews, you get bad reviews, and you are rejected. Or you get good reviews and you are rejected too, but you don't know why.
So
And it leads speculation. Then you go to panel, you should never do that. Who is my reviewer? Okay, you go to panel and you realize who is your reviewer because you know people. You know, if somebody's writing to your reviewer and has Australian English and you know the guy, you met him 10 times on meetings, you know who is your reviewer.
Yes, and I just want to follow up on something that I think is really important that you said, which is you are never necessarily going to really know the reasons why you're rejected. And you know, if it's an approach method, great. You know, oftentimes people will be identifying things to help justify it. But when it comes down to that final funding decision, and this is especially true at NSF, there are a lot of factors that go into making an award. As Jennifer mentioned, we just funded 4 things within that field. We're not going to fund a 5th. Just that's the way it goes. Similarly, you know, they have to take into account a bunch of other factors, where the money is going, the type of institution, demographics of the investigator, the students that are served. So, you know, a program is not going to make all of its awards just to one institution or just to one state. And so it could just be one of those things where, you know, you're in California, and there are a lot of research institutions and a lot of researchers there. And NSF realizes that they can't make all their awards just to California. It has to go out to other states and other types of institutions as well. And to really pick up on those kinds of reasons from your panel summary, it's impossible.
I know, but that means it's politics. It's not science anymore.
One other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch on too, you said sometimes you get a good review and you're still not funded. So what can sometimes happen too, and this really depends upon the SRO or the program officer, just depending upon the situation. You know, I always advised if the conversation, like let's say the initial reviews were really positive about a proposal, those are what goes into the system, which is what generates your summary statement, right? So let's say at study section, your proposal is discussed and somebody derails it. You know, somehow it's like, oh, it's so positive. And then all of a sudden someone says, but this, and then it goes down a rabbit hole and things suddenly change. Maybe or maybe not, whomever is taking the notes that's going to draft that resume and summary of discussion. And, you know, maybe they're going to really accurately reflect how that discussion ensued. Sometimes the SRO is going to advise the reviewers, please update your comments, you know, to reflect this discussion. I always hammered that. That was the very last thing I said to my reviewers before I ended a study section. Please, if you have altered your scores, if you have changed your mind, please go back, because this is the only thing the PI is going to get from you are your comments. Please update your comments to reflect that discussion. But, you know, without actually doing it myself, which I'm going to admit, I sometimes tried to help with those resume and summary of discussion. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And that's really frustrating. So that's why it's also important to ask your program officer if they were there for the discussion. And so they maybe have some insight into why, because that's a really important point. You're like, why? I got these great reviews and I didn't get funded. And it sometimes can be those political aspects, and sometimes it can be that those comments just weren't updated to reflect what really went down.
Well, in reality, it never happened to me. I never ever get reviews and comments to reviews because of a summary. Never. Mm-hmm. You'll get reviews and that's it. Okay, and you don't know. It's black box, and you have to work with that as it is. You know, and you know how it is. Black box and everything which is you know, not transparent leads to speculations. And your speculations are well, it's very hard to say, okay, my program is, it's not good, and I have to do something else. So come on.
I just want to really hit on this, which is the speculation phase is just not going to be productive, and it usually doesn't lead to great things. This is the opportunity to calm down, so to speak. If you happen to be upset by it, reach out to your program director. If they are there, usually every single program director is taking notes for themselves that they're going to refer back to prior to their meeting with you. They're going to read the reviews. They're going to think back on the event, and they're going to try to share with you as much as they possibly can in most cases. And this is just one of those things where as much as you can during those meetings, ask your questions, be quiet, listen, let them talk, go for the clarifications. If you try to argue with them, all they're doing is giving an historical account of what they remember about these things based on their notes. And what's to argue in terms of that? Just general things to keep in mind.
I know that effect very well because I work for a company too, and in company, the science was, if you are involved in a certain program, you never come and you say to your executives, my science is very wrong and I would like to do something else. It's what executive part of a company will do always. And the people are upset because you get executive decision about your science, which is your baby, and you will never give up. But 10 years after, you realize that they were right, okay? And they did the right decision. But you will never do that at the time of their decision. Never, ever. Because your science is your science. You spend part of life with it. So how come?
Yeah. And I think you're bringing up something that's also important when you're thinking about being responsive to proposal solicitations. I've met a lot of scientists that are like, this is what I do. This is the only thing that I do. I'm going to keep doing this. This is the most important thing in the world, period. And that's fine. If it's trendy and fundable, it'll get funded. But unfortunately, the trends in science change over time. What's popular and what's trendy change over time. There's something to be said about trying to adapt new approaches. You can still be answering the same kind of question, but there's ways that you can wrap it up and apply it in terms of that significant statement. I'll leave it at that.
All right, and I think RDS can help with that significant statement because that is oftentimes what does it. I want to make sure we have time to get to Adam's question. Adam.
Great, thank you so much. That was lovely and very, very informative. So thank you both. Thank everybody. This has been great. My question is about submitting grants for multidisciplinary projects and trying to find the right place. I understand the strategy of approaching the program officer and discussing them directly, but in a scenario where you have a very multidisciplinary projects, I know Eric has done this quite a bit. Is it merely to craft the grant the most important for trying to find your right fit, or is it the discussion with the program officer? Because when we've submitted stuff, where it's very computationally savvy, but it's also clinically and basic science relevant, right? So when you go to a computational study section or a generalist study section and you wind up getting comments that say, well, you really should be in a study section that deals with the clinically relevant aspect of this. And then you do that and you hear exactly the opposite. You wind up ping pong. Do you get the breadth of the question?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
How do you strategize that the most other than just chatting with the program officer? And how do you craft it right to aim? Because you guys have done it with Cyverse and a bunch of other projects where it's so massively multidisciplinary.
For NSF, when you're, oftentimes there are going to be specific calls around this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, where you're trying to bring these various groups together.
Yeah.
And there's going to be usually specific calls for that, or a track within a program that's specifically like, hey, we want computational applications in this particular field.
Yeah, but then you're open up to the competition, the entire world, right? It's such a huge pool.
Yeah. So often when it comes down to this, it is about having the right team in play to really demonstrate that you can carry this off, and then carrying out that convincing story to this panel. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're going to have someone reviewing your proposal and it's heavy on the computation and they're not computational, there's a good chance they're not going to get it. Hopefully, the program officer has constructed the panel and the reviewers to make sure that there's the blend of expertise to cover the full scope of what's in there. And again, if you're finding people being like, this is way too computational for my program, and someone else is like, this is way too biological for my program, you need to talk to them and try to figure out, where the fit is. And it might be that opportunity where you're going to have to either break it apart or find a program that's really there, or say, hey, I think you're missing stuff. And you can take a long-term view, especially with an NSF. And again, I'm not trying to like shortchanging the other programs, but there's something in NSF called RCNs, Research Coordination Networks. These are small awards that are designed to bring a community together around an emerging topic, usually lasting 2 or 3 years. Get the people together, write your white paper, and that can help inform what a future program could be.
What is that? I'm sorry.
They're called RCNs, Research Coordination Networks.
This is through NSF.
Yeah, most of the programs will have opportunities to fund RCNs. And if you're interested in doing one, that's another great thing. And I can talk to you about that more offline in terms of what an RCN is and how to approach your program in order to pitch something like that. Yeah,
because we had some scenarios where we had like Galgiani, right? Huge Valley Fever, Yves Lucier, huge computational, right? We had clinical veterinary aspects to stuff and basic science. And each individual was clearly more than adept at their respective areas, right? It was, and they of course, rave about the group. So that the first issue you brought up is, it's obviously not, not an issue with how the group is structured or their expertise or their commitment to the area or their productivity, certainly not. And so you wind up just getting these, the comments where the study section people can't interpret the immunology aspects of the grant if you're in the computational realm, and you get my point.
Yeah. Adam, what I'm going to suggest is let's set up a time specifically with Jamie, look at those reviews, see what they said. Let's do the interpretation of it in order to unravel it. Because the core thing here is not to argue against the reviews, it's to try to understand what they're saying in terms of how to make a better pitch in the future. And it could just have been not the right fit for the program, but those reviews will help make light happen, hopefully.
Yeah, the strategy right now is to go to the mycology. Donna Love is big mycology, infectious disease specific kind of thing, and go through her as the program officer and have her steer us. And because it doesn't seem like you have a lot of options otherwise, it's just see if you can have them steer you, in a particular manner. But that craftsmanship of linguistically dancing across 3 or 4 different fields is really quite hard.
Yeah.
Thank you for offering to help.
Thanks.
And you put her email in there. I know it's getting to be 10 o'clock. I don't know if people need to go. Looks like we have one more hand up. Do you have time, Jamie and Eric, to stay?
Yes.
Okay, Kate.
Oh, I was just gonna ask about if you guys could touch a little bit on the importance of the part of your proposal, which gets at this reviewer side of things about, putting in preferred reviewers or people who shouldn't review proposals. I know I've talked to a lot of PIs who are reluctant to name colleagues in the field. So I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
Oh, I use them.
Yeah. No, VA did not specifically have that particular mechanism. I know NIH does, but I relied so heavily on ad hoc reviewers that if I had that, it would have been such a game changer for me. And so I think that program officers do really consider that. You just have to be careful that it's someone that knows enough about what you do, but that isn't going to represent a conflict, you know, that they're not going to get eliminated because of a COI.
Great. All
I don't know
right.
if that helped, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, I think we're over time, so we better wrap up. But thank you. I learned a ton. This was really, really great. Thank you so much for sharing your great expertise and being willing to talk with people afterwards.
course.
Everybody, have a great week and a great weekend coming up.
Great to
Thank
see
you.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. That was great.